The topic is the Nashville Civil Rights Movement, and we're talking to Professor Gloria McKissack, who was a participant in the Nashville Civil Rights Movement. And of course, Professor McKissack, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to talk about faith and adversity, I think as you've indicated, for the first time in a real sense, meeting the race issue in Nashville, Tennessee. Let's talk about your involvement and how you became involved in this movement, especially when your father had already warned
me
that he did not wish you to become involved. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Okay, so here I am in Nashville with this cultural shock. I need to say we came down on the train back then. And when you got to Cincinnati, you switched to the L&N, and that brought you into the South. And they put us on the back of the train, and being young, we thought, oh, great, you know, we just had a big party from Cincinnati. And it was later that I realized that I had been Jim Crowed. And I rode that train one more time, and I never rode it again. I refused to be Jim Crow. But the second time I rode that train, I remember going into the station, and they had those signs up. And I was not familiar with these signs. I'd heard about it. And I went into the white restroom, and I looked in there, and I looked into the colored restroom, and I refused to use the colored restroom. It was the difference between night and day. And when I came out, this was my first act of defiance. I took down the sign, and I've had it ever since. Ever since I've had this sign.
Signs.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. 1922 is when it was put up, but I took it down in 1961, and I still have it. So I had that feistiness in me, and we were in the student union, and some of the Freedom Riders, and I really wasn't aware of the Freedom Rides at the time, and that these students had been put out of school and all the things that had transpired, and they were looking for young recruits, freshmen especially, naive people, to get involved in the movement. And myself and my girlfriend, we decided to join them, and we went downtown, and we had very little preparation. Some people just think that there's this long period of preparation, and some people did experience that. But we went to First Baptist, and we had one day, about a half an hour, preparing us for nonviolence. You know, and again, that was a transition. I was a Detroit girl, and we fought our battles, you know, so, but anyway, we went to Wilson Quick, was my first encounter. Wilson Quick is about across from where the new downtown library is located. That was Candyland then. It's totally different now. But after a short period of training and telling us to go limp and be nonviolent and not talk back, et cetera, I found myself at Wilson Quick. Had a long counter, you know, they had those lunch counters then. And when we walked in, this was my first sit-in, everyone left out, and a mob formed on the outside, and there we were in the back sitting at tables, and fear had not come to me yet. It was an experience, it was an adventure, but it got real to me as they dragged those students out one by one, the bus boys. And the next thing I knew, I was the last person in there, and that's when it got real, and I got scared. But I knew God was with me, and I never will forget being dragged out of there. I also learned not to wear good clothes either. And we got dragged out of there, and I never will forget a white woman sitting on the lunch counter, and she looked at me, looked down at me as they pulled me out, and she said very sarcastically, "Don't hurt the little." And I had never been called it before, and that's when I joined the movement.
That forced you into
that did it for me, and I knew that this was something I had to do. And from then on, every Saturday, every weekend. I lived off campus, by the way. If I lived on campus, I would not have been able to be involved because they had curfews.
Okay.
But I lived in approved housing, and so we had more freedom. But my experience ended, and I mean, we did Cross Keys, Crystals, all those places. Had bricks thrown at me, paddy wagons, the whole 9 yards.
So this was a real violent kind of thing that you were coming to realize.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I had a brick thrown and just missed my head, hit me in the back. I've had back problems ever since that brick. But my involvement ended sooner than I wanted it to. We were involved in a sleep-in, and that was at the Andrew Jackson and the Hermitage Hotel.
Okay, I remember the Andrew Jackson, and I know where the Hermitage is.
Yes, down where T-Pack is now, the Hermitage is still there. And the young men were at the Andrew Jackson, and the young women were at the Hermitage. And when I say sleep in, I mean we were in the lobby. You know, we would stay there all night. And again, the goal
protesting the fact that they would not allow you to be to have a room there.
Right. And so it was an all-night event. And my mother called, and my landlady covered for us and said, "Well, the girls are out on a date." You know,
you were down
and I was at a sit-in, you know, sleep-in. And she called again. And after a while, my landlady had to say the girls are at a sleep-in. Well, that was a horrible thing to say, a sleep-in, bad enough a sit-in, but not a sleep-in. What does that mean? And anyway, long story short, my father got involved, the man said, and it wasn't that my father didn't believe in the movement because he lived a life of being a political activist himself, but I was his little girl, you know, he didn't want me to get hurt. And he called the dean's office.
Okay.
And the next morning, I had to meet with Dean Payne. You remember Dean Payne? No one wanted to have to meet with Dean Payne. And I had a choice that either I was moved on campus and under curfew and get out of the movement, or I had to come home. Okay.
Okay, and of course, let's have this second commercial break, Professor McKissack, and then we'll give you an opportunity to talk about some of the notable personalities that you became involved with during this time. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Civil rights movement in